I'm going to improvise like a writer on some assumptions. And though I feel a little uneasy in doing this and saying this, nevertheless, what a writer is obliged at some point to realize is that he's involved in a language which he has to change. For example, for a black writer, especially in this country, to be born into the English language is to realize that the assumptions of the language, the assumptions on which the language operates, are his enemy. When Othello kills Desdemona, for example, he says, I threw away a pearl richer than all my tribe. I was very young when I read that, and I wondered about that. Richer than my tribe? I really had to think about being as black as sin, as black as night, black-hearted. And in order, this is another story which I won't go into, in order to deal with that, really, to deal with that, at a certain time in my life, when I was not in this country, but in France, where I could not speak to anybody because I spoke no French, but no one wanted to speak to me. I dropped into a silence in which I heard, for the first time, really heard and began to be able to try to deal with the beat of the language of the people who had produced me. I might have been able to do that here, but in the event I was not able to do it here. I did it far away. And when I was able to hear that music, because when I was young, there were no black writers as models, and white writers could not be models either. I did not agree at all with the moral predicament of Huckleberry Finn concerning Nigger Jim. It was not, after all, a question about whether I should be sold back into slavery.
Free to live, no? Do you think you have the right, or I have the right to tell anybody else who or he or she should marry, who he or she should love? That will weaken the fiber of the nation faster than anything else.
I want to try to shift a certain assumption. I want to suggest that instead of, as we have now for far too long, according to me, instead of speaking about the civil rights movement, which is an American phrase, which I'm going to go into in a moment, which upon examination means nothing at all. Let us pretend But I stand before you as a witness, and let us pretend that everyone under the sound of my voice is in the same condition. I'm a witness to and a survivor of the latest slave rebellion. I put it that way because Malcolm X and I met many years ago when Malcolm was doing a debate with a very young sit-in student, and Malcolm was a black Muslim, and the radio station called me to moderate this discussion. Malcolm was one of the most beautiful and one of the most gentle men I met in all my life. He asked the boy a question, which I now present to you. If you are a citizen, why do you have to fight for your civil rights? If you're fighting for your civil rights, that means you're not a citizen. And in fact, the legality of this country, and I won't further investigate the word legality, has never had anything to do with its former slaves. We are still governed by the slave codes. Now, when I say a slave rebellion, I mean that what is called the civil rights movement was really insurrection. It was co-opted. Now the late J. Edgar Hoover is in his grave, God bless him. I don't know, and I'm not sure I know how to answer it. About San Diego, Black Studies Department, and the whole academic, political crisis you're talking about here. I'm not, I really don't know how to answer that, because all I can tell you is you have to save that department. I
I know how power works, but I really honestly don't know how to answer that because I'm not there. As for the second part, I always say about that it's a revolution which is unprecedented, and it's true they have the guns, but we have something else. They have the guns, that's all they have. Let me put it that way. And I know this. When a kingdom can defend itself only with guns, it hasn't got long to live.
The latest slave rebellion was brutally put down. We all know what happened to Medgar. And it was not some lunatic who happened to be wandering around Mississippi with a gun. The one lunatic in Mississippi at that moment happened to have a gun somewhere. And by some odd coincidence, unbelievable, shot Medgar Evers in the carport of his home in the sight and hearing of his wife and his children. And Medgar was 37. The lunatic was carried into the front door visibly of a nursing home and out the back door, and that was that. We all know what happened to Malcolm. We all know what happened to Martin. We know what happened to Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. And so many more. Honey, don't tell me. I mean, the list is long. That is the result of a slave rebellion. Now, I'm saying that since we are the survivors of it, since we have our children to raise, to save, I'm saying that to say a very brutal thing must be said. Must be said. The intentions of this melancholy country as concerns black people, and anyone who doubts me can ask any Indian, have always been genocidal. They needed us for labor and for sport. Now, they can't get rid of us. We cannot be exiled, and we cannot be accommodated. Now something's got to give. The machinery of this country operates day in and day out, hour by hour, until this hour, to keep a nigger in his place. It is true that this is going to be a difficult summer. In every city in this nation now, black father is standing in the street watching black son. They're watching each other, and neither one of them got no place to go. What am I saying? I'm saying we find ourselves between a rock, if you like, and a hard place. I am saying something else. I am saying that our presence in this country terrifies every white man walking. I'm going to go back and clarify that a minute. I want to suggest, and it's a very important suggestion, first of all, this is not now, never has been, and now never will be a white country.
But the foremost spokesman for the black American in our country today, a very important artist, Mr. James Baldwin.
The truth is, I think that all of us, without exception, need each other. Every single one of us. I don't care what color you think you are. We are stuck together here. And it's a matter of celebration, not a matter of sorrow. Again, we find out who we are by looking into each other's faces and accepting each other as we are. To try to become an artist is in some way to remain in a state of wonder.
He wrote books like Notes of a Native Son, Nobody Knows Your Name, The Fire Next Time, Crying Holy, The Amen Corner. Did you ever hear of James Baldwin?
No. Not that I know of. Keep getting mobbed. Sometimes we get ready to get mobbed sometimes. So I guess we won't be here next week. So we're going to have a mob. We're going to have a get a roller. We're going to have a get a roller now. Smash them into little pieces. Have you ever heard of Martin Luther King?
I sure have.
People tended to ask the most ultimate questions of Baldwin when he was here. It was, and they saw him as a redeemer figure, as a savior. And in the very explicit words of young people, I mean, people who at the time The Fire Next Time was published were only, say, 1 year old. It was amazing to witness or to see these young people bear witness to the fact of this man's being, and his being was so magnanimous. And that was one reason why I did not regret having involved myself with what actually went on over the course of a year's preparation to bring Baldwin here. The man in his being is just simply magnanimous. He gives so much. He tries to bring out always the best in people. And I saw it from hour to hour and minute to minute, over and over, from 8 o'clock in the morning until sometimes 4 o'clock the next morning. And I did not regret one bit having involved myself in that responsibility, which I did not know at the time was going to be such a tremendous one. But the man gives. I mean, it is a fact of his being that he gives. This young fellow we met our restaurant down in Oakland, and this young fellow comes up, and he's about 21 years old. And the elation, the sense of elation that he had when he found out that this was James Baldwin was overwhelming to me. Because in that moment, I realized that historical forces or historical powers in some way were coming together. And that is not that this young fellow was anybody who had ever done anything out of the ordinary. It was simply that he brought a new age to the being and the history and the documentation of who James Baldwin is and what he meant. He came up and he says, "Oh, Mr. Baldwin, Mr. Baldwin. Oh, Mr. Baldwin, are you really James Baldwin? I thought when I came in that I recognized your face, and you are James Baldwin. Mr. Baldwin, do you know that when I was in high school, you are the cause of me to graduate? I made an A on the paper that I wrote for James Baldwin. Wow, Mr. Baldwin. Oh, Mr. Baldwin." And this went on for an hour. And the fellow was not pretentious in one bit. Mr. Baldwin, why aren't you president? Mr. Baldwin, why are you sitting here? Why aren't you up in the Hyatt Regency somewhere? And Mr. Baldwin says, of course, "Well, I've been there. I know what that's like. And I'm here because I want to be in this spot, in this place." And that was the first one. He was the first one that evening. This was about 5 o'clock. That lasted until about 6. Another fellow of another age sat down at 6 or so and stayed for an hour, coming from a different experience because he remembers he was growing up at the time that James Baldwin was known as the one who was going to see that America had a conscience.
Is absolutely true. And this means that we have to consider, first of all, that white, Malcolm said, it's a state of mind. Because I don't want to be misunderstood as saying, I'm not talking about white people. Insofar as you think you're white, you're irrelevant. We can no longer afford that particular romance. We are all, in any case, here. I want to point out a paradox. The only people in this country who have any notion of who they are, the only people in this country who have any notion of who they are the black people in this country. We come out of a history, black people in this country come out of a history which was never written down. The connection between father and son, between mother and daughter, until this hour.
One of our facts is always a little difficult to isolate. And, well, how can I put it? I began to write around the time I started to read. And I was fascinated by people and all that. I used to do Christmas pageants with the church, and I wrote school songs, my poor brothers hadn't seen for years. But I never thought of that as, it didn't occur to me I was going to be a writer. I began to be a writer in my own mind, really. And this has a lot to do with my father. Largely because of my father, I entered the pulpit when I was 14. Largely because of my father, not only because of my father. And I was in the pulpit for 3 years. Now, a great many things happened to me in that 3 years in the pulpit. And one of them was being exposed in a way I never had been before Of course, I was an adolescent. It's also about puberty. Seeing for the first time, the brothers and sisters of the church, and really seeing the lives they led, and the role the church played in their lives, and the role that I as a young minister played in their lives too. And it was kind of overwhelming, to be exposed to so much misery, so much love, so much faith, so much pain, day in and day out, week in and week out, for 3.5, for those 3 years. I thought about it, but I eventually felt that I had no right to stand before him. But I was doing something wrong.
I'm not really sure I follow that.
Well, let me say it again. What I when I describe you, doesn't describe you. It describes me.
All right. That I follow.
The myths about black people in this country and the myths that white people still live with about black people in this country are very simple. Either you're guilty or mammy if you're old and black. You're a saint. If you're young and black and a woman, then you got a bad reputation. If you're old and black, you're Uncle Tom. If you're young, you're Tom. And black people live with this since we got here. And white people cling to this myth in order to retain what they think of as safety.
What you're saying is that we haven't, for all of the so-called revolution in our country,
the world is going through tremendous changes, and in fact is coming to an end. Now, to say the Western world is coming to an end does not imply the end of the world. The source of his black son or daughter still trembles as much as he did in 1865. All deliberate speed was a concept in 1954, and 25 years later, it's revealed as being nothing but a lie.
Can I stop you there?
It is still true until this hour that what white people think, and look, when I say white people, I'm really quoting Malcolm X, who pointed out a long time ago after his trip to Mecca, remember that Malcolm had said, when he was a black Muslim, that all white people were devils. There was a whole theology to prove it. And Malcolm, before he was 39 years old, before he was murdered, and coming from where he came from, made an unprecedented journey, and came back and said, that isn't true. White is a state of mind. That means for me that white is a moral choice. Do you know? Now.
No, I'm not sure I do.
Well, white being a moral choice means that white is a metaphor for safety. People think they're safe because they're white. And they see.
Does that then follow that everyone who's black is unsafe?
That is what the American mythology dictates, in legend and in fact. I'm Jimmy Baldwin from Harlem, 1924, and all the myths, all the romance that a white cat can have about this country or about Europe, I could never afford. I left to finish my first book, and I finished it, and I came home. I've been based here, really, though nobody seems to know it, since 1957. I stayed here until, I was based here until Martin died.
Yes, and you left right after Martin Luther King's assassination because...
Well, it's very unified. I was not trying to escape.
You pay
And now, I'm 55 years old now, right? It's extraordinary to me that the only people who have ever asked me that question are white Americans. It's a question black people do not ask. Black children don't ask it. They ask, where are we going? What should we do?
And what do you tell them? And what do you tell them? We have a very brief amount of time, but I would like to know, what do you tell them?
Well, I tell them two things. Well, first of all, a kid has to hear the question, and then he can do with it himself, But the future, I said, the future belongs to you. After all, 30 years ago, it's only 30 years when I went to France. The sun never set in the British Empire. Now the sun can't find it. And in 20 years, the century ends.
So you tell them the future belongs to you?
Yes.
James Baldwin, writer and poet and great thinker. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is The Tomorrow Show. I'm Jessica Savage for Tom Snyder.
I guess, too, another thing that struck me most was watching Baldwin's interactions with his audiences, especially the way he deals with young people. He never talks down to young people. And I think a number of people have pointed this out, but he never talks down to young people. He speaks to them head on. Young people, as he says, can ask some of the most brutal questions, and he's not answering them brutally. He's answering them honestly, as they are asking honestly. And I think that is what the young people respected so much about him. I mean, the kids at Berkeley High weren't born when The Fire Next Time was published. But it was as if this were a document of their lifetime. That this work, the whole corpus of this man's work, belonged to them and was written for them within that particular period of their growing up, which would be now. And we are not in that time. In a way, though, we are in that space and time. And the questions of those students and the inspiration that they got from his works, I think, are very basic testimony to the fact that Baldwin's works have that much life. It's a tragic implication also there, though, I think. And that tragic implication is that the questions are, in a way, a testimony to the fact that, as Baldwin has pointed out, things have not changed so tremendously. Fundamentally, there is a lot in the country that is still so very insidious. And because the students ask questions that one would thought might have died or passed away at some time in the 60s. Then to just watch the range of people, old women, 90 years old, coming up, Mr. Baldwin, will you please kiss my great-grandchild? Here is a man, and they know what he is. He's blessed.
I want to suggest, and I want everyone to think about it. I know the machinery is vast, ruthless, cunning, and thinks of nothing, in fact, but itself, which means us, because we are a threat to the machinery. We have lived through, as I suggested, a slave rebellion.
That the plane came in on time. Baldwin was delayed for about a week, though, because he had been involved in seeing to the funeral services and all. I think of his friend Beauford, as he called him, Beauford, Delaney, the artist from New York, who in a way had been a sort of guardian angel for Baldwin in his early years. These were the years when, during his youth, there was so much internal turbulence that as Connie, who runs the restaurant, the West Indian restaurant over in San Francisco, says, because Baldwin worked for Connie when he was a youth there in New York, and in the 40s, and she says that at the time, she thought he was going to destroy himself, but Beauford Delaney seized him, and being an artist himself, knowing something about the internal spiritual trials that one might be going through here, and he latched on to young Jimmy and gave him a lot of guidance that set him on the road to see about preserving himself. And the week before Baldwin came to Berkeley, Delaney died. And the night that I picked him up from the airport, I had sent him a telegram there letting him know that he should take care of himself because he got sick after Delaney's death. And that was basically because, I think he said later on, he held so much in. But he came, and that night, in a way, there were three of us, myself and Baldwin and Carl Anthony, who was sitting down talking, and this delayed us tremendously for an engagement we had, but it was something that I was not going to interrupt for any engagement, because in a way Baldwin was winding down, and it was like a requiem for Beauford Delaney that he was doing while we were sitting there, and it wasn't anything conscious.
To be an Afro-American or an American black is to be in the situation, intolerably exaggerated, of all those who have ever found themselves part of a civilization which they could in no wise honorably defend, which they were compelled, indeed endlessly, to attack and condemn, and who yet spoke out of the most passionate love, hoping to make the kingdom new, to make it honorable and worthy of life. It is a question which can paralyze the mind, of course, but if the question does not live in the mind, then one is simply condemned to eternal youth, which is a synonym for corruption. I moved to Europe in 1948 because I was trying to become a writer and couldn't find in my surroundings, in my country, a certain stamina, a certain corroboration that I needed. I discovered I was an American when I got off the boat in France. I was an American at the age of 24 for the very first time in my life. I became an American in a foreign country because I was not anything else. It was not, I mean, a matter for rejoicing. It was a great shock. It was a tremendous, tremendous revelation. I became an American at 24, and I realized what it meant, both for better and for worse. That experience, and again, I am speaking not exactly in my own person, really says something of utmost importance about the moral life of the West, again, for better and for worse. The fact that I had to leave my country in order to realize that I was part of it, or that it was part of me. It is, of course, in the very nature of a myth that those who are its victims and at the same time its perpetrators should, by virtue of these two facts, be rendered unable to examine the myth, or even to suspect, much less recognize, that it is a myth which controls and blasts their lives. The truth is a two-edged sword, and if one is not willing to be pierced by that sword, even to the extreme of dying on it, then all of one's intellectual activity is a masturbatory delusion and a wicked and dangerous fraud. Where the people can sing, the poet can live. And it is worth saying it the other way around, too.
To be more or less the catalyst for bringing that sort of thing about. Many of us can get together and think, and look, it's not just for the University of California, it's for many of the other institutions around here, but of course the University of California is the biggie, and we should set the pace on a lot of things. And so I hope that something like this will be important if we do get some sort of a conference that will be materialized. Okay, question right over here. Gentlemen, it's been answered for a while.
Being host to James Baldwin, well, I guess I can start by going back to the period during which I was basically doing the research for the exhibit in the library, when I was selecting quotes to put in the cases.
Yes, but what was it really like?
It was like at that point for me, yeah, it was at that point for me, thinking this is the person, or not simply this is the person, but this is a person I wish I had known from the day I was born. That was the feeling that basically overwhelmed me as I was doing that research for the Baldwin exhibit. Then being host for this man was a nervous experience, a very, very nervous experience for me, and it proved to be an enlightening experience for me in terms of my own personality. I had no idea that we were going to undergo such a rush of experience.
That too. I'm afraid, to tell you the truth, that I probably cannot go to Rhodesia now. The nice thing about it is I may be there tomorrow, who knows? But at the moment I had other plans. That doesn't mean that I disagree with you about Ian Smith and so much else.
Okay, right here in front.
was when he was smaller. And if David's mad at me, he called me nigga one way. And when he's not mad at me, it's something else, you know. And it's one of, I'm not sure I can define it, but it's one of the, it's part of a system of telegraph signals, you know. Beg pardon? Well, I always thought it was, you know, comes from the word Negro, which is not sure it's black, and then, you know.
Okay.
You might be right. Does that answer you at all?
This collision between one's image of oneself and what one actually is always very painful. And there are two things you can do about it. You can meet the collision head on and try and become what you really are, or you can retreat and try to remain what you thought you were, which is a fantasy in which you will certainly perish.
And does until today. And all of the things that he was talking about, like affirmative action or equal opportunity, and all of those things, are menaced and by the stranglehold of this system. What I'm trying to say is, whatever we're talking about, we have to bear in mind that that is what we're up against. That is what has to be, in one way or another, defeated, outwitted, overthrown finally, or, you know, with fall of its own weight. But we are always in that shadow. There are thousands of boys sitting in the tombs right now who have absolutely no right to be there, no reason to be there. How do we get them out? And we know very well that we can march and petition the mayor, the president, and we have done it for years and years and years. And it's not until there is something, some advantage they can gain from responding, it's only then that they respond.
Have people of her ability to come out.
I hear your question, and it's a little, it's a little distressing. I don't want to discuss the book right today. I'll read it one of these days.
And yet, the terror within is far truer and far more powerful than any of our labels.
Sure, stand up. Alternative to black.
Don't you know? No, that's not what I mean at all. I said Mark Weiman because I should have said European model.
When a civilization treats its poets with the disdain with which we treat ours, it cannot be far from disaster. It cannot be far from the slaughter of the innocents. However solemn we writers, or myself, I may sometimes sound, or how pontifical I may sometimes seem to be, on that level from which any genuine work of the imagination springs, I'm really, and we all are, absolutely helpless and ignorant. In America, I was free only in battle, never free to rest. And he who finds no way to rest cannot long survive the battle. The reason people think it's important to be white is that they think it's important not to be black. A writer, whether or not he knows it, always has to go to the source because there isn't anything else to work from. We have all heard the bit about what a pity it was that Plymouth Rock didn't land on the Pilgrims instead of the other way around. I have never found this remark very funny. It seems wistful and vindictive to me, containing furthermore a very bitter truth. The inertness of that rock meant death for the Indians, enslavement for the blacks, and spiritual disaster for those homeless Europeans who now call themselves Americans and who have never been able to resolve their relationship either to the continent they fled or to the continent they conquered. What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger. I am a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. The American terror of the world, of reality, the American attempt to deny and manipulate experience, I have always equated with the American terror of dealing with me as a human being, dealing with Sambo.